Hey everyone, this is Erica Lucas, your host and founding member of VEST, an organization connecting women across industries, regions, and career levels, so that together we can expedite the pipeline of more women in positions of power and influence. Welcome to another episode of the Vester podcast, where we explore the invisible barriers holding women back in the workplace and share stories of women building power collectively.
Almost every opportunity I've had has started in failure of some sort, whether it was mine or somebody else's, right? You're buying a business out of bankruptcy, or you're buying a business that's on the verge of collapse, or you're starting something because somebody else couldn't get it done. That really gave me, from a very early age in my career, the perception that not only was failure not fatal, but that sometimes failure was the most fertile ground for opportunity. Blazing a trail is messy. Launched a Senate campaign and then took my company through a bankruptcy. And I did it for all the right reasons, and I wouldn't change a damn thing. When we make decisions that align with our values, even when they don't work out down the road, it's going to feel understandable why we made those decisions.
In this episode, we talk about ways to overcome fear of failure with Sarah Amico, Executive Chairperson of Jack Cooper's Holdings, North America's largest car hauling company and women-owned enterprise. We also discuss Sarah's approach to building a company where she employs thousands of hardworking union workers in the midst of the auto worker strike, her approach to managing setbacks when she was a Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor in Georgia and ran alongside Stacey Abrams, as well as her 2020 Senate race and the bias women face when it comes to risk-taking. This episode is made possible thanks to our venture arm, Vester Ventures, a venture capital firm investing in women-led companies, building tools, products, and services that enable women and working families to thrive both at work and at home. And by our VEST membership, a community made up of professional women across industries, regions, and career levels, working together to create the future of more inclusive workspaces. If you're interested in learning more about Vester Ventures and VEST Peer Network, go to www.vesther.co. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend and don't forget to leave us a review. This episode was part of a more intimate coaching session with VEST members and has been repurposed to accommodate this episode.
I'm in the business of building businesses. So right out of business school, I went to a startup that was doing software consulting in New York and New Delhi in India. And the revenue had grown from maybe $1 or $2 million to $10 million really quickly. And the founder, who was effectively a programmer, recruited some of us from Harvard Business School to come in and help sort of set up the infrastructure and management systems. So right out of school, it was sort of out of the frying pan into the fire. And my first day of work, I still remember the other two people he had hired that started at the same time I did, both became engagement managers on the consulting teams. And then he sort of looked at me and said, "You'll have to tell me at the end of the week what you're going to do." And he said, "I just liked your background and I think you'll add value. And I'm not really sure that we want to just put you on client teams. So tell me what you think you could do." And over the next 2 years, I ended up building out their CRM process, interviewing literally every client the company had ever had to sort of get a sense of where the strengths and opportunities were. And it was fantastic, but it was building up the infrastructure of a business so that it could scale. I left because as much as I loved working with my boss and as much as I loved the entrepreneurial environment, I had really no passion for software consulting. And my husband's an engineer who runs a data privacy tech startup, VC backed. And, he's like, "I literally don't understand how you were ever in software anything." Because I am the liberal arts person in the family, right? Like I've been good at math for a long time, but I don't have like multiple masters in engineering like he does. And so I went from there and I thought this was a wonderful first experience, but I need to do something I feel more passionately about. And I ended up spending the next 8 years, really almost a decade, in media and starting in the William Morris Agency mailroom. So literally pushing a mail cart. And you have to remember at this point, I'm like a few years out of Harvard Business School, and I'm pushing and delivering mail and at the bottom of the totem pole with kids that like haven't graduated college yet, who are the assistants, right? So be careful, I think, is the moral of the story. When you pray for humility, sometimes you will get it. And but I loved the experience. I loved the camaraderie that formed as we were all starting out as equals and sort of making our way up in this industry. And again, in the agency world, I was very fortunate because I moved up really quickly. And, a few years later, I was a department head already working with corporate clients. In the agency, you're always building a business, right? Because you have to come in and build your own client list. You have to generate revenues. I can tell you there is very little sympathy when you are unable to perform in that respect. And then when I finally got promoted, it was partially due to the mailroom fund. They were raising the seed capital media fund with Venrock and Excel and AT&T, and they realized they had a Harvard MBA sitting and answering somebody's phones in the corporate consulting department, and they were like, "You can come and be the day-to-day person on the fund." So, it again was startup world. And then when I went and immediately, like within a year of that, was poached to go and start a rival agency's department, it was starting the department from scratch. And then a funny thing happened. My husband's from Italy, and so we were very far away in Los Angeles from my family, which was all in Georgia at that time. I grew up in the Midwest, but my family's all sort of migrated down to Georgia. And his family is still in Italy. So we were just very far. And we had our first daughter. And I came home on maternity leave right before I was going to go back to work. And I don't know if it was the hormones or the family or an elegant cocktail of both, but we bought a house in Georgia. And that was very hard to explain going back to work. And I loved my boss at APA, where I was their department head for brand integration and marketing. I loved him, still talk to him this day, still consider him a mentor. And we went out to lunch and I said, "I bought a house." And he said, "Oh, that's great, honey. Where did you buy a house?" And I'm like, "In Georgia." Sorry. And to his credit, like he was like, "Okay, how do we keep you?" And so I worked remotely, from Georgia for the next couple of years. Eventually, I joined the board. I had been an owner as a family member in a logistics business and joined the board in 2011. So I had 2 jobs on 2 coasts with 2 kids under 3. That was fun. I didn't sleep a lot, but over the next few years, it became really obvious that there were opportunities to grow our family business in the logistics space through mergers and acquisitions and recapitalization. So my dad's been a turnaround CEO for the better part of 4 decades. We sort of find all of these businesses that are either on the verge of collapse or maybe are in bankruptcy or maybe need to be restructured that everybody else has given up on. And I guess we're a sucker for the long shot because we like to go in and try to fix them, but to do it in a way that puts valuing people and the dignity of work and workers and labor rights first. And that always throws people off because they're not used to seeing that in the restructuring world. And eventually I came on board full time. And within a year, our CEO had resigned unexpectedly, retired early. And the board voted to put me in as the executive chairman. And I was like mid-30s and, had 2 little kids and all of a sudden was the executive chairman of a $600 million company. And it was an incredible opportunity, but it was coming in at a moment where we had a very large acquisition that didn't go well on the integration. The debt was pickable, so was ballooning very quickly. And where we had reached a size and scale in our market where our customers felt like eliminating risk in their supply chain meant that they had to downsize the amount of business that they had. And so as much as it was an incredible opportunity, it was also walking into the eye of the storm. My first week as chairman one of my first weeks as chairman was the Ebola crisis in West Africa, and we had trade lanes and an NVOCC business heading into West Africa. And I'm literally trying to get our team out of Lagos on like the last flight that's going to leave. And that was the easiest thing I did that year, probably. So it was baptism by fire. But if you look at where we've come, the business that we started with was like $28 million and maybe 100 employees in 2008. So my dad bought the first business in the middle of the Great Recession. And then as a family, about a year later in 2009, we bought Jack Cooper, which was 10 times our size and on the brink of collapse after almost 90 years in existence. And right about the time we were all high-fiving each other for helping save jobs, GM and Chrysler, who were our two biggest customers at the time, filed for bankruptcy. And we found ourselves on the front line of the auto bailout and the Great Recession, kicking and scrapping just to make payroll sometimes. And from there, we're now at like 2,700 employees. I think that's actually light because the supply chain disruption is still pretty severe in auto. And of course, now we have a strike, so I'm sure you're all aware. And we're tracking at about 680 million in revenue. So from that, like very relatively small initial business, we've come a long way, and that's amazing, and it's a pleasure to be a part of it. But again, the theme, Erica, was kind of growing businesses, and I don't think the growth per se is what I'm most proud of. It's amazing, but I think the thing that I'm proud of is that our drivers, our union, our pension, they will take my call. I know them. I know their leadership. I think there's mutual respect. I'm proud that we've given our people fully funded Cadillac healthcare, whether they're union or not, and that we pay 100% of the premiums, not just for our employees, but for their families too. I'm proud that when we went through our own really painful restructuring in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2019, so not that long ago, nobody lost their job. Nobody lost their healthcare. No union members lost their seniority or their union retirement or their pension. Something had to give, and our family sort of decided that would be us. We forfeited our equity to restructure the business, and as a result, everybody kept their jobs and their healthcare, and that was really hard to do. I launched a Senate campaign in the middle of that 10 out of 10 do not recommend. Very hard to translate that kind of nuance into the political universe. But I wanted people to know what it looked like for working families and for businesses that try to do the right thing by their employees, how hard it is to compete and how much the market penalizes us sometimes for that. And so, I don't regret it for a minute. And in the end, we were able to buy the business back later. Of course, as we bought it back, the pandemic, took off. So we have interesting timing on all fronts. But on the other side of that, I think the business is stronger, leaner, more efficient. And I feel a sense of purpose that really exceeds anything I've ever felt about making sure there is some example out there for people to point to where the good guys can still win, and where the business owners don't have to be the bad guys in the narrative, where you can do the right thing and still do well and still generate a return for your investors. Sorry for the long answer, Erica.
Don't apologize. I think you should be going to every university to talk to, especially our, younger generations that are coming in, because I think you're the perfect representation of like, listen, we get it. Capitalism has been broken and it hasn't provided the same access to opportunities to everyone, but there is hope, and there are leaders like Sarah building great companies with employees in mind. So I love that, and thank you for sharing. You lead one of the largest car hauling enterprises in North America, not just the U.S. You employ thousands of hardworking union workers. In light of the strike and the labor disputes in the industry, how do you see the role of building collaborative relationships to address the challenges by both the company and the workers, and like how you optimize profit still while providing all of those benefits? What strategies have you used, and how do you continue to find common ground? What can you share?
Yeah, I mean, look, my view is this is the process, right? It's unfortunate that sometimes that process leads to a work stoppage or a strike, but it is the process. This is the collective bargaining that ultimately protects everyone in the ecosystem, right? I'm not sure that my first priority is always optimizing profit for just shareholder value. I think sometimes it's optimizing profit and prosperity for the stakeholders. And that's a very different thing, right? That includes your customers, it includes your workers, it includes, of course, your investors, right? But it also includes the communities where we live and work. We try to have a real physical and visible presence in the dozens of places across the continent where we have work locations. So it's painful as somebody who loves the auto industry. My granddad was a custodial worker on a assembly plant line in St. Louis for General Motors. My dad went to college on a scholarship from General Motors, where he would work 6 weeks in a factory and then go to college for 6 weeks. So every 6 weeks he was moving back and forth from Michigan to St. Louis, Flint to St. Louis. And that's how we paid for college. And it was really the only chance, unless you had an athletic scholarship for someone that to go to college that had no family support, really. And so it's painful. I love the products that we move. I love our customers and what they mean, not just to the economy and to the jobs they create, but to what it says about American ingenuity and our ability to build great things that transform lives. And at the same time, there has to be a resolution that is good for all sides. And that's really hard. And look, we live in a world right now where this is hard on a lot of fronts, right? We have a Congress that can't pick a speaker right now. We have 2 wars where we can't seem to get a lot of consensus on acceptable outcomes for both sides. So does it surprise me that we're seeing this moment where across the labor landscape, whether that's Hollywood, right, my old stomping grounds, or whether it's the auto workers or nurses who walked out at Kaiser Permanente, no, doesn't surprise me at all. This is a moment of reckoning about what capitalism looks like today and how we make it work for everyone, because it can, right? It's a total myth that you can't do good and do well. It's a total myth that management and labor have to be on separate sides and at loggerheads. And it's a total myth that the prosperity we create for our investors can't be shared across the people that make the business possible. And I think if I were going to those colleges, Erica, what I would say is it's not really about me or the Jack Cooper story, although I'm very proud to be a part of it. Every single one of those kids sitting in a freshman seminar this year can do that. All of them. The inequity exists because we permit it to exist, because we don't ask for and demand better. And that doesn't mean that you can't produce a return. I'm in a capital intensive business, right? Like I have these massive trucks and they're like $250,000 to $300,000 a piece that we have to invest, and they only last for a certain number of years, and we have thousands of them. So we have to generate a return. We're in a capital intensive business where we have to go out and raise money in the markets, particularly in debt capital markets. But we have to accept the fact that when we have these seasons of sort of prosperity, there's a lot at stake in letting everybody participate that. And it doesn't take anything away from the investors. It doesn't take anything away from the management teams. I think it shows that we're all rowing in the same direction.
one of the reasons why we started Stitch Grew, our nonprofit arm for supporting entrepreneurs. And our slogan is literally building a more inclusive economy through entrepreneurship, is because we 100% agree with you. If we work with entrepreneurs, obviously I'm biased, but particularly women and people of color who have been divested for decades, I truly believe that if we get in early and we start talking about building equitable systems and equitable companies, I do believe that we can demand and expect better and do better ourselves.
I was just going to say, I think your point, I just want to click on this because obviously, as a family business, even though our family didn't come from any money, right? I still remember my dad losing his job when I was 11, and that being one of my most formative memories. And actually, a colleague of mine who still works with us to this day bought our groceries that week. And I didn't learn that until I was, an adult. So I understand that piece, but I also understand I sit at a point of a lot of privilege, right? Whether that is because I'm in a family business, because I had access to great education, even though I grew up in like a one high school town in the Ozarks, and my kids get the biggest kick out of it. They're like, what public school did you go to? I'm like, the only public school there was, kiddos. Like, this was the high school. That's it. I've had a lot of advantages. I had access to great teachers and mentors and job opportunities and parents who at different times in my life could actually help support that along the way, right? I also lived in New York as a kid working in the mailroom when my parents couldn't help me at all. And that was really hard. But there's a lot of privilege in, I think, many parts of my story. And so I want to make sure we double click on what you said about women and people of color, and particularly women of color, not always getting that same access. And it's something we've taken really seriously at Jack Cooper, not just on diversity and equity and inclusion work and really creating a workplace where people feel seen and heard and valued, and where that's intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. But we've done it in a way where now over 30% of our management team is women at all levels across the company. But if you look at women and people of color in management as one group, we're at 42%. Like in 100-year-old trucking company. I can't tell you what a journey that's been, but it's not a box checking exercise. As that's happened, our decisions have gotten better. Our performance has improved. Our customer service has gone up. Our ability to attract capital has gone up. Our ability to think critically through complex problems and eat the elephant one bite at a time as you solve them has gone up. And sometimes I worry that that doesn't happen more because the fear of failure, sort of where we started this conversation, which is if we are held to a standard, whether it's because of race or gender or socioeconomic status or by the way, immigration status, let's not leave that out here either, right? If there's a stigma, then when you fail, it's like you've met expectations and everybody feels like they can move along. But in reality, there are groups of people who enjoy privilege where that isn't the case. And I think if we don't flag that, it's going to be harder to get to parity for women in the workforce. It's going to be harder to have boardrooms or halls of Congress and state legislatures that are representative of what the population in a given place look like in terms of diversity, right? And for me, I think I got very lucky because I do restructuring and turnaround work for the most part, right? So we were talking earlier about this, but almost every opportunity I've had has started in failure of some sort, whether it was mine or somebody else's, right? You're buying a business out of bankruptcy, or you're buying a business that's on the verge of collapse, or you're starting something because somebody else couldn't get it done. And that really gave me from a very early age in my career the perception that not only was failure not fatal, but that sometimes failure was the most fertile ground for opportunity, right? This ability that you can feel like you've been buried, but you've been planted, right? That was fundamental to how I thought about my career from the very beginning. And I wish that we framed that more, I guess, prominently for women in particular, because who cares? Like if you fail, we're in the middle of, working on a potentially really big acquisition right now. And I kept hearing from our CEO, well, we don't want to do this or that because we don't want to be embarrassed if it doesn't work out. And I'm like, I don't know who the we is here because I literally don't care if I'm embarrassed. I want a chance to save these jobs because it's a lot of jobs at stake. And it was funny after we talked through it. He was like, I sort of get that now, right? Like it's okay if we go out on a limb and swing the bat or whatever analogy you want to take, if you're doing it for the right reasons. Even if it doesn't work out, you can walk away with your head held real high. And you can walk away with the knowledge that people you probably didn't even know were paying attention watched that and will behave differently in their own lives and take risks differently in their own careers because of it, right? Like you're slowly peeling away that stigma where it had no right to exist in the first place.
100%. And it's actually a beautiful segue into our topic of the month. It's easy to say, yes, take risks, do things that scare you. But for decades, due to societal norms and biases that we see in the workplace, despite the performance level that you talk about, I mean, I talk about that consistently, right? It is the profitable thing to do all of those things. I mean, you can see it and data proves it in terms of outcomes when you invest in women and invest in DEI efforts intentionally, like you said. But despite all of that, survey after survey on HR, both men and women continue to evaluate men and women by a completely different set of criteria. One. Two, both men and women continue to see women as having less leadership potential or being less competent, both men and women. As a result, I feel like women then we try to then shoot for perfection because we feel like we have to be almost perfect in order just to have a seat at the table. And so this then leads to hypervigilance, and then it leads to over self-criticism. And by the way, this is even double for women of color, who we've been told and internalized that we have to be not 2 times, but 3 times as good just to have a seat at the table. So I often tell people when they say, well, women don't take risk as much as men or at the same rate as men, I always say, well, it's not that we don't take risks, it's that we're forced to take a lot more mitigated risks because we're evaluated on a completely different set of criteria. And we don't have the same latitude to fail as some of our male peers. It's always good to talk about, like, how do we do this? How do we overcome fear? But also understanding the biases that we also have to overcome. Have you ever experienced being judged by a different set of criteria, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, the way I look at it is that failure isn't a mark that you're incapable. It's a mark that you believe in the extent of your capabilities, right? If you go through your entire career devoid of failure, I think you left a lot of gas in the tank. I think you could have done a lot more for a lot more people. And for me, that would be not only unsatisfactory at a deeply visceral personal level, but it would mean I didn't live up to my potential. And so the question for me is not really about whether or not we're going to fail. Guys, we're going to fail. Like, by the way, I don't know how many of y'all are married, but like, you're occasionally going to feel like I'm failing at wifing or parenting or, like all, and sometimes all at the same time, right? Where I'm like, Jesus, I just want to hide in a movie theater and watch something like a rom-com because it feels like you're failing equally in all directions. And that's okay. That's human, but it also means that you're living. It means you are out there putting vulnerability up front where you can build meaningful relationships and have meaningful impact. And that grace needs to extend to our businesses and our careers too. And look, you have to be a responsible fiduciary, right? Like, I certainly understand that. But there are many, many instances in the business world where rapid iteration, which is another way to say frequent failure, right, has been the foundation of enormous success. And probably Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc., about the rise of Pixar, is one of the best examples of this. If you haven't read it, by the way, it's completely worthwhile. But a lot of people don't realize Pixar, for like the first 10 or 15 years it was in existence, they opened every single movie at number one, like literally all of them, for some ridiculous stretch of years, right? And in the book, he talks about how they used rapid iteration to get to that point, where they would bring in not just insiders and people who worked on those films, but peers in the industry, directors, producers, other studios, to take a look and tell them honestly what's working and what wasn't. And that they didn't take that as like water on a flame, but it was fuel for the fire, right? That drove their success. And I think my favorite quote in the whole book was, he says, look, at some point, every one of our movies sucked. And when you think about like all the great, Toy Story and all this great product that they put out that was revolutionary at the time, for him to say that should give all of us like a sigh of relief and inordinate inspiration for an iterative process that makes us better. And we do have to take calculated risks, and we do have to understand that there's not parity in the workplace by gender or by race right now. Although we're trying and we're making a lot of progress, we're just not there yet. But I would say use iteration, use what we learn from failure to sort of fuel your success. Don't let it be a brake pedal. It's got to go that direction. So I'm not sure that addresses the gender and race gap, Erica, as much, but I would say you set your own standards, right? You're not building your career for anyone except yourself and the people who depend on you to get your job done. And if you're meeting the standards for those two groups, you're acing the test.
You did answer it, I think, in a way that I often also do, whether we're talking about fear of failure or the biases that exist with how we evaluate men and women, same as imposter syndrome. Just know that some of it is real. Some of it is like, what do we need to do to either overcome that fear of failure or take risks? And some of it is just situational. Just be aware that there are biases that exist and that it's not always you. And that, to your point, focus internally. What do you want to do? How are you going to do it? And how are you going to push yourself forward to do the things despite of, and in a way that doesn't lead to extreme self-criticism, which we all do.
There's nothing wrong with naming it too. And maybe that's my particular way of fighting back, but I don't think we do enough to call it out in real time when we see that different yardstick for measuring different groups of people. When I ran for office in 2018, so I'd never run before, and I live in like a ruby red, uber gerrymandered area. So it was statewide or bust, right? And I had no intention of running for office at that time, but in 2017, when I made the decision, it really felt like the beginning of, honestly, what would become years of democracy feeling really at risk in this country to me, and I think to a lot of people. And so I wanted to do more than write a check to a candidate. I wanted to put my hat in the ring, and I'm proud that I did. But for me, it was I think, a real wake-up call also. I spent my time in media and trucking. So I really thought you couldn't get more dude-dominated than those two universes. And it turns out you can, and it's called politics. And we should have all known that after Hillary Clinton, no matter if you voted for her or not, this was Voldemort and Hermione, right? In Voldemort, it's awful, but the way she was treated in the media was markedly different, right? And we've seen that across a number of people, but it was a real wake up call for me my very first meeting with press as a candidate was a publisher. I won't say which one, but a relatively large newspaper. And it was a woman. So I thought, well, this is great. And it wasn't. I had to drive to meet her like a couple hours round trip while I was on vacation with my kids. I threw on like a sundress and a blazer because, again, I'm on vacation with my kids, no power suits packed. I definitely did not have makeup on. I don't really wear makeup. This is like the first time I don't know, the last couple months, and probably the last time you'll see it this month. And my hair was like all beachy and air dried. And when I showed up, we had a 40-minute meeting. Again, driving 2.5 hours round trip for this 40-minute meeting. And she spent 25 of the 40 minutes lecturing me on appropriate hair, makeup, and accessories for female candidates in the South. And it took every fiber of my being not to explain to her how I thought that was perhaps unhealthy for her and for society. And I tried to politely listen. I tried to steer it back to issues or resume or anything. And she really wanted me to know about pearls. I got all the damn pearls. But let's be honest, if pearls were the issue, Jim Jordan would be up there in, Congress right now wearing strings of them. And it's not going to get it done because he's not the right guy. And it was really an eye-opener for me that women do have a different standard, right? Like there's no expectation of hair and makeup. But, you can wear the same suit every day on a campaign trail if you're a guy. And if you swap shirts out every now and then, more or less, people will like never notice. It is so different. And it really made me stop and think about all the places we see that and people don't call it out. And to this day, I regret not saying, I'm not sure if you're aware you're doing this, but this is pretty inappropriate. And also, it really furthers a lot of stereotypes that I find unproductive for myself and fellow women and for my daughters. And I would appreciate it if you could divert the conversation to something of substance. And I didn't because I was new and because I didn't want her to hate me and write about what an idiot I was in her paper. But to this day, I regret it. And I think from that point on, I've made a point of as politely and professionally as I can, pointing it out in real time when I see a lens that's being used that's different by race or gender or background, union, non-union. And I can't say it's garnered me the most friends in the workplace sometimes, but I can say occasionally I notice people's light bulbs come on. And they're just not aware they're doing it. And when you say it and you do it with grace and with kindness, they actually respond and change. We have an infinite ability to change for the better as humans. Like we don't give ourselves that credit a lot of times, but people more often than not will live up to your expectations. So we should set those expectations appropriately.
I love that. I love that. I see that Sophia has a question. Sophia, why don't you unmute yourself and ask it?
I love everything that you're saying. It's very impactful and empowering, and I'm very much on that journey right now. So I wanted to ask you, as someone that has already gone through that journey and knows her worth, what advice would you give to someone that is still going through that and still learning the difference between the pressures of society and what it means to be a woman in business, and just sometimes I realize I put these pressures on myself and I don't realize it. So I was wondering if you had any advice on how to overcome that, or how you realized that you were doing these things.
Ooh. So Sophia, thanks for the question. Number one, I have good news and bad news. And the good news is I think the advice is to trust your instincts, right? The totality of your experience from the time you're born till right now gives you a lot of data. You're like a supercomputer. And if you process that in a way that lets you build an intuition, and women, I think, are particularly attuned to this sometimes, trust it. I don't know a lot of people who've ever told me about the examples of when they hated that they had trusted their gut. But every friend I have can tick off a number of places where they didn't, and they came to regret it. So trust who you are and what you know about yourself. And I think also trust and have confidence in what you bring to the table. Know your value and know that other people will see that too, not because you tell them, but because you're showing them in how you work and what you can deliver. The bad news is, it never stops, right? I think my mom was a neonatal nurse, loved her job, gave up her career when my dad got to go to graduate school, which again, it was a big deal in our family because he was the first to go to college. And, she then became a mom, stay-at-home mom, which was her, joyful sort of preferred profession for a number of years. And then now she's a romance writer. Could not have had a more 180 kind of transition. And she didn't start her first novel until she was in her 50s. And I think she's published 13 now. So, it's okay to have that be a journey of discovery that doesn't end. And to learn what it is to be a woman in a career or a workplace, or to be a working woman or a working parent, working mother, or to be a woman who has a good career, but also has passions and hobbies and interests that lie outside of your home and your office. That's a lifelong journey. And I think it's healthy. I'm already excited down the road to figure out what my next career will be, right? Like I assume there'll be something else, because up until this point, it's been an interesting turn of events, but just trust who you are. And again, that doesn't mean that everybody else will know it from day one. That if the standards we're meeting are our own and achieving the goals we set for ourselves, that should be enough.
Love that. Michelle on the chat says, what are some of your best tips for change management?
Rapid iteration, embracing what you can learn from everything that doesn't break your way, listening, proportionate to the problem you're solving versus talking, which is ironic, I realize, because I'm sitting here talking a lot. But Anna Torres, who's on with me now, she and I have had an incredible journey with an organization that we built over the last few years, where we interviewed hundreds of people around the country about what they thought the American dream was and whether they felt like they had access to it, how it's changed, what that's meant to them, and how we can make it more real for everyone and more accessible for everyone. And the thing that I learned over the course of and I think we're at 300 or 400 interviews, is shut up and listen every time you have a chance. And if you're going to take the time to put people in a meeting or to set up an interview, take the time to hear what they have to say. I think one of the hardest things to understand as a female executive, and I do think it is a little bit different for women than for men sometimes, it's hard for me to understand when somebody puts together a big meeting with a lot of attendees to work on a problem or an acquisition or a task force or a financing deal, and then the conversation is dominated by one or two or three people. What the hell does everybody else need to be there for then? Presumably they're good at what they do and they have something to contribute, or you would not have included them. So let them speak and listen. That would be probably my biggest on change management. A lot of times also the people at the front of the operation, the front line of your workers, they know a lot more than some of the office folks do. And valuing their input appropriately, I think, is really important. And then the last thing I'll say, it was not my idea, so I'll give her credit, but Frances Fry, who is an author and professor, she and her wife, Ann Morris, write these incredible books, and you should buy and read them all. And they do a podcast that's fabulous, but they work specifically on change management, right? So Frances was the board member that they brought in at Uber, for example, when Uber had its sort of cultural Armageddon, and she was brought in to help right the ship. And she said something that has stuck with me ever since, and I think about it every day. that judgment and curiosity can't exist in the same space. So as long as you're curious, you can work with people you had no idea you could work with. You can solve problems that other people assume are intractable. But judgment and curiosity can't exist. And I like this, Erica put in, neither can perfection and growth. Amen. Yeah. So be curious. And if somebody says something or behaves in a certain way, like before we jump down them, with our mama bear claws, like ask questions. Like it's okay to put people on the spot too and say, I'm not sure I understand what you're driving at here. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you would ask that? And then just shut up and like let the awkward silence speak for itself until better words exit the outport.
What would be your biggest takeaways for VEST members and for listeners when it comes to overcoming fear of failure?
I would say to embrace everything life has to offer, right? Like the days that are hard make us really appreciate the days that are amazing. And the challenges that we conquer will give us some of our proudest moments. And we see that, but sometimes in the middle of it, day to day, it's really hard to stop and take stock of like what the totality of our experience is. But embrace it for what it is. It's an opportunity to grow. And unfortunately, part of the time, struggle is a part of that, right? Sometimes it's unavoidable. And I think that the sort of classic story that we tell kids when they're little, right? You can't break the butterfly out of the chrysalis because it won't survive. Like it needs to fight and kind of break out of that. And that's part of how it learns to spread its wings and take flight. And that's the same for us. I mean, it may sound a little bit cheeky, but like it's 100% accurate. Like you're going to need to build those resilience muscles the same way we build everything else. And embracing that can be really hard, right? Like I, again, launched a Senate campaign and then took my company through a bankruptcy. And I did it for all the right reasons. And I wouldn't change a damn thing. But you have to be comfortable when we make decisions that align with our values, even when they don't work out down the road. It's going to feel understandable why we made those decisions. We're going to feel better about it. We're going to have the absence of regret, that kind of visceral regret that I think sometimes as women we can kind of carry with us for a long time. And let that be your guide. I think that's the most important thing. And I would also say a sense of humor comes in real handy, right? I love the Ted Lasso attribution in the chat. That surrounding yourself with people who see you for all that you are and not just a moment where it looks like things didn't break your way. Blazing a trail is messy, right? You're going to have to hack at the foliage in front of you. You're going to get some scratches. You're going to be tired. You're probably going to be sweaty and stinky. That's okay. It also means that the people behind you are going to enjoy a clear trail that takes them to places they didn't have access to before.
I want to close out with this. You mentioned the need for a support system and like just having people around you. Who is in your support system?
Oh, I think you need both. So you need a support system, but you also need a challenge network, I think is what Adam Grant calls it. So the people who like don't mind calling BS from time to time and don't mind telling you when you're out over your skis a bit. Sometimes that one's even more useful. For me, I have my parents. My grandmother's like a real straight talking, old school, didn't grow up with much and really gives me the perspective of appreciating everything that I have, even when in the moment it feels like it's all kind of in chaos. And my kids, right? Understanding what we're working for. For me, I don't want my kids to ever encounter, the publisher story. Like that stuff's for the birds. And I don't want the next generation of women to have that same challenge. And I have a few good friends that I can say exactly what I think. And I would put Anna among them, by the way. I can tell her, I'm sorry, I can't talk today because my kids are self-destructing and my deal has gone sideways and I'm going to be in banker and lawyer town until the end of time. So, I'm sorry, I'm not available. And she just kind of smiles and says, I hope it works out. So I think having friends that you can sort of put your ugly on the table and they just kind of say, yeah, I got that too. Or, oh, I'm so sorry. And, don't sweat it. That's critical. And having something that's screen free has been a revelation for me too. So my grandmother's teaching me how to quilt. And, that is like the most stereotypical American, like, art form in a certain way, right? In the sense that like it's this very traditional, but it is old school. You cannot cut corners in quilting. And if you don't measure precisely and take your time and your seams are not the 1/4 inch that they're meant to be, nothing fits. And so it really teaches me to be present and focused and to delight in the details, even when they're driving you nuts. And I think I take some of that back into like parenting. I take it back into, being a working woman, but I definitely take it back into the chaos that is sort of like turnaround and restructuring management that we do.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and don't forget to leave us a review. And if you're ready to take your career to the next level, apply to join our community of professional women, all eager to help you get there and stay there. Go to www.vesther.co and apply today.